Hello, everybody. Mr. Armstrong here, welcoming you back once again to my home office and studio, as well as the room in my house where my cat uses the bathroom. Welcome back. It is good to have you. For today's e-learning assignment, I had something important planned for you to do, but then I got distracted by this lamp. I can't quite figure out how to turn this lamp off, and it is really, really bright, and it's really, really bothering me. I hope it's not bothering any of you guys on your end. But now that I think about this lamp and all the light that it's shining on me, and the shadows that it's casting on my closet door behind me, that gives me a great idea for an important drawing lesson I would like to run with all of you guys about light and shadow and how artists can use light and shadow in their artwork to create things that look three-dimensional and realistic, like we've been working on a lot this week. So I'm going to put some things together and share an important worksheet with you all. And I hope you enjoy today's lesson about how to use shading in your artwork. Good luck. For today's e-learning lesson, we are going to be discussing shading. Shading is a very important skill that all artists should have at least some experience with. Shading can improve the overall look of your artwork by continuing to add three dimensions and depth to your drawings. Shading is a very simple skill that takes a lot of practice. We'll discuss shading first today by going over some simple vocabulary and getting some basic practice under our belts. Starting first with vocab, let's talk about the word value. Value refers to either the lightness or darkness of a color. You'll see a series of values here in this table. Whether you're describing a very light color or a very dark color, when you're referring to how light or how dark a color is, you're describing that color's value. This table here is commonly called a value scale. More on value scales at the end of our lesson, but it's important to understand that value refers to the lightness or darkness of a color. Artists use values to create three dimensions using a technique called shading. Without the ability to create very light lights and very dark darks and all the various values in between, artists would not be able to create something realistic and three-dimensional like this sphere here. Let's talk more about shading. Shading is the artistic application of values to imitate the effect that light has on an object. Shading effectively creates the illusion of three dimensions through the use of highlights and shadows. There are a lot of techniques that artists can use when shading, depending on the material they're using or what effect they're trying to achieve. You could use hatching, cross hatching, stippling, blending. Essentially, what you're doing when shading is creating a series of light lights, dark darks, and various values in between to create an object or an image that looks round and three-dimensional, an object that appears as if light is shining on it. Let's take, for example, this sphere, and let's imagine that it's sitting on a table. If I wanted to shade this sphere to make it look three-dimensional and round, I would first have to determine where the light source is coming from. Let's say, for example, the light is at the top right corner of the paper. The light source would be shining downward from the right onto my sphere. The top right-hand corner of my sphere here would be receiving the most light. The area down here furthest from the light source would be the darkest shadow. I would even be creating a shadow on the table where the sphere itself is casting a shadow because, again, the sun is shining on it from the top right. Artists understand this, and they know that when the light is shining on an object, the area that receives the most light should be the lightest. This is called the highlight. Down here, furthest away from the light source, would be what is called the core of the shadow, or the very darkest darks on your paper. In between the highlight and the darkest parts of the shadow, there's going to be a smooth transition of light middle values. Lighter grays near the highlight, darker grays near the shadow, gently blended from light to dark to create something that looks smooth and soft. Down here on the table, as mentioned before, we create what is called a cast shadow, a shadow in the shape of the sphere, angled on the table because the light is shining at it from about a 45-degree angle. If you want to get really fancy, artists know that there's going to be a small amount of light reflected from the table upward onto the sphere. That's what creates this lighter edge between the core of the shadow and the cast shadow down here. That reflected edge is light that is bouncing from the table onto the sphere from this angle. Values allow artists to create three-dimensional objects on flat two-dimensional surfaces. Knowing how to create a variety of values and how to create soft transitions between your lights and your darks can allow you to create round, realistic, three-dimensional artwork that again manipulates and creates the illusion that something is three-dimensional when in fact it isn't. In today's lesson, you'll be creating a value scale. You're going to practice using a pencil to shade very, very, very light colors gently towards a much darker value, creating a series of values in between. Doing so will help you practice pencil control and visually seeing different lights and different darks. It's a really useful technique and skill that a lot of artists will practice frequently. So we're going to do that today. I'll be demonstrating how to use a printout that I shared with you to create a value scale. If you have no printer available to you, have no fear. It's simple to create your own value scale. I'll walk you through how to do that now. Okay. So for today's lesson, what I would like you to do is, if you can, print out a copy of the worksheet I shared with you in the Google Classroom. Should look something like this. After that, all you'll need is a pencil. Now, I know it's not possible for everybody to print out a copy of this worksheet. If you can't, have no fear. You can easily make a value scale using a piece of white paper. It would be helpful if you had a ruler, but any straight edge something will work, and I'll use a pencil here to just create a simple value scale. All a value scale really is a series of boxes that touch one another. You can use these boxes to then practice your shading. So I'm going to use a ruler here to create a series of boxes. Now, the worksheet that I provided for you has 7 boxes. It'd be great if you could make 7. If you can't, try to make 8. You can make 9. Just try not to make 2 or 3. We want to have plenty of boxes to practice creating very subtle changes in value. So I've made 8 here, and that's totally fine. I'm also going to want a large rectangle, and I'm going to create that just by tracing my ruler here. You'll see why I need both of these value scales as the video progresses. So whether you have a ruler or not, creating a simple value scale is super easy. So I'm going to turn back now to this worksheet, and I'm going to show you how to fill these various boxes in with different values and practice a little shading, just like you should be doing at home with me right now. So what I'm going to do on this worksheet is I'm going to begin up at the top where it says step 1. Step 1 says, using a pencil, create 7 different values going from lightest to darkest, similar to the example here above. So I'm going to try to recreate this printed value scale below using nothing more than my pencil. What I like to do is I like to start value scales by beginning with the darkest value. The reason I like to start with the darkest value is because, quite honestly, it's the easiest. Pushing my pencil really, really hard, I'm going to create the darkest mark that I possibly can with my pencil. This is going to allow me to know exactly how hard I need to push to make the darkest mark possible. Every other one of the values on the scale is going to be created using a lighter touch than this. So that's kind of my baseline. I'm going to move now over to the lightest values on my value scale, and I'm going to start here in the second box. The reason I don't start in the first box is because that lightest value should remain white. There's no need for me to do any pencil work there. I'm going to move now to the next box, and with the lightest touch I possibly can, I'm going to start to fill in this box. One of the biggest mistakes artists make is that they begin this first box too dark. If your first box is too dark, it's going to be really hard for you to create all the different values between your lightest and your darkest as you go. I now transition to the next box, and pushing a little bit harder, I should be creating a value that's just slightly darker than the one before it. Again, all these should be subtle changes. It shouldn't be one light and then the next one extremely dark. No, it should be just a little bit darker. So now let's move on. I'm about halfway down my value scale. So this should be a good middle gray, a little darker than the box that came before it, similar to the example I provided you above. If you make a mistake, Just go ahead and erase it. Moving on now, as I start to get into my darker values, I'm pushing a little bit harder, but not as hard as I did for that first box. That's going to be my darkest one. Let's go now into this final box, shading it in just slightly lighter than the darkest value all the way to the right. Now that takes practice to get those subtle changes. So if you have to do it over and over again, that's why I gave you the freedom to print out as many of those worksheets as you need. Now that I've done this on this value scale, I'm going to turn my attention to the value scale below it. This is the really important value scale. It's not often that artists have their values separated into nice, neat little boxes like shown above. I don't often have these lines telling me where one value starts and where the other value begins. I'm going to now practice softly shading to create really soft, smooth transitions between my light values and my dark values. Just like I did up here, except without the use of these lines. No separate boxes, all one box. For this value scale, I am going to start all the way to the left because I found it easiest for me to just kind of softly push a little harder as I go rather than working dark to light. So I'm going to start all the way to the left. You can see I'm slowly pushing harder as I go, trying to match the color I see above it to what my pencil is doing below it. Right here at about the midtones, I should be getting a nice soft gray. If I'm really dark at this point, I know I've probably pushed too hard. I'm going to have mostly dark values. So use that value scale above you as a guide. Pushing harder now, harder, harder. I should start to get really dark values as I approach the end of my value scale. Pushing about as hard as I can on my pencil right here near the end. So there you go. Two simple value scales, both very important skills to practice. Now, if you want to do something fun, you can take your finger, and I did say soft transitions. A lot of artists will actually blend their pencil together using either a finger, or if you're like me and you don't want to get your finger really dirty, you can use a tool called a blending stump. If you don't have a blending stump, a piece of scrap paper will do. Roll it up nice and tight, tear off a little corner. You could even use a paper towel or a tissue for this, just something to cover your finger. You can roll it into a really sharp tip if you need to blend really fine details. And just kind of smooth that value down. You're just kind of eliminating your pencil strokes, making everything look soft. Again, they make tools for this, but they're expensive. Paper's free. So there you go. Soft transitions achieved. The cool little trick. So today you should fill in both value scales, the top and bottom value scales on this worksheet. And again, if you can't print this out, I understand. Just do it on a scrap piece of paper. There you go. Good luck.